Hey everybody, welcome back to Ascending with Ashley. I'm Ashley, and welcome back to Freedom Friday. Today, we're going to talk about genocide. Hello. Hey. I'm making a video. Here, you want this? Anyway, we're going to talk about genocide. So, I started a project in between the Freedom Fridays called Collective Coffee. I've only posted one so far. I constantly have cat hair on me. I don't know if someone's gonna cooperate with this right now. What do you need? So I just want to talk about the stages of genocide. I'm seeing this talked about a lot more on TikTok. I've already talked about this before. I have a video from a year or so ago called Is This Genocide? Where I already talked about these steps, but now we're seeing it large scale again in different ways. So I want to remind everybody, first of all, before I start talking about the stages of genocide, of what we talked about last week when we talked about like these systems of oppression. And I added sexuality and gender, which I added into the comments. I realized I forgot it. So we've got education levels, labor, class, religion, race, ethnicity, all of those things at the bottom of the hierarchy of oppression. So genocide occurs by these folks on these folks, okay? Hang on. Excuse me. But a lot of the times what that looks like, instead of it being specifically like from up here, it looks like genocide down here. Like they've kept us at ends and at against each other. So usually genocide is actually carried out by folks who are all in the same oppressed level. But it's like an oppression Olympics, right? At like large scale, because it's genocide. It's like killing folks because you feel yourself more worthy or something. I don't know. So I want to talk about these stages because we're seeing this. So really quick, why I wanted to talk about this is because we are seeing this in our country at all of these different levels. Really, right now, sexuality, gender, like trans folks are really being targeted. We're seeing a lot of labor stuff with migrants and stuff. I mean, poverty, folks who are in poverty, homelessness, we're seeing that go way up. But I think something that, hang on, let me finish this thought and then I'll go on. Religion, if you're not an evangelical, Christian, Catholic, whatever, you're wrong. Race, that's pretty obvious. Black folks, and brown folks are being killed by the state, by police all the time. So I really wanted to say, like, when we see genocide happening here in the United States, I feel like there's multiple happening at the same time. But it is to eradicate, so like it's being carried out to eradicate all of these different folks from this bottom rung, but it's not just one of these things that's being targeted, it's all of them. And then you have people within each of these groups on the bottom rung who feel it's their duty to carry out these things because they feel like they've been promised something from these powers, right? Basically, ultimately, that's what it is. So I made another cute little piece of paper and I wrote better this time. But you know, you have access to Google, so like, why do you need this, right? So the first one is classification. And that's where like power groups categorize people, us versus them mentality. And so we see that all the time with all of these things, right? With all of these differing things in our society, right? So I would like to argue that because this country is founded on genocide, it's always used genocide as a means, but it's always been, it hasn't, the atrocities have not been seen or viewed the way that other genocides have. So I'm just gonna hold on to that, because at any given time these are always happening to a certain group of people or multiple groups of people. That's what I really want to hit home. And I think that what we're really seeing right now is just a testament to all of this. I'm not making you potatoes right now. Can you go eat your mac and cheesies, please? Then we have symbolization. Identified groups made to stand out from others using like symbols. So Gregory Stanton made this list of 10, and it's really based on Nazi Germany. But there have been modern like genocides in Africa, especially Rwanda in the 90s and Darfur happening in Eastern Africa, right? Yeah, Eastern Africa. I did a lot of my undergrad work on Darfur and like the Lord's Resistance Army in Congo. And why I'm sharing this is because a lot of the parallels I saw studying that are coming through here. Like, they target children, and they make children go against their families. So like in the Lord's Resistance Army in Congo, and the Janjaweed militia who did like were the folks in like Darfur that were killing folks, they target the children, and they like make children kill their own parents, and then they take children. I did a lot of work on like child soldiers, specifically from like the Lord's Resistance Army, because I found it so fascinating. I find genocide in general fascinating because I just can't comprehend. I've always found it intriguing how it works, and so that's why I studied it. I found it fascinating. But now that I'm like living through this, it's really challenging to know when to speak up. I've tried to speak up, but I'm whatever. Anyway, that's besides the point. So symbolization. So the identified groups are made to stand out from others. I went on a tangent like usual. So colors, clothes, and categories. So I'm going to use the trans folks as an example right now because this is huge in this country right now. And it's really, the rhetoric and the propaganda have really picked up in the past few months to be trans exclusionary, to talk about, I mean, I've seen news folks make the parallel to diseases or roaches, which is like straight up Rwanda shit, right? Like, yes, this all happened in Nazi Germany, but like Rwanda specifically was in between the Tutsis and the I don't know, it was two ethnicities, I forget the other one, Tutsis and I don't remember, but they had like a radio going that would like talk about the roaches, and it was the group of people that was targeted. And so it's this programming and it's this rhetoric. So I feel like with trans folks, specifically right now, identified groups are made to stand out from others. The bathroom thing and the drag show thing, and the book banning thing, and the gender affirming care thing, especially for children. And I'm mostly talking about Florida because Florida's already implemented this stuff, but it is starting to go into other groups, which we talked about in Collective Coffee. So if you're interested in a little more, I was talking about ALEC and how that system stuff works. But anyway, I feel like colors, clothes, and categories, I mean, it's very obvious to see that. It's an easy distinction to make visibly when identifying folks. And so I feel like I really feel like this is just picked up within the past few months. And so I feel like that categorization has people really on edge because they're being completely bombarded with this rhetoric constantly and propaganda constantly. I just saw a TikTok about a woman who identified herself as like a butch lesbian using the women's bathroom, and like this woman like freaking out on her and being like, this isn't the right bathroom, and like called security and shit. So that's that colors, clothes, and categories, right? People are able to visualize and put people in a category based on their look because they look trans or they have feminine features or whatever it might be. Regardless, they're not cis hetero, okay? And so that's how folks are being able to target, and that's when we're seeing more people stick up for this whole system And like that woman that called the security guard, like utilizing herself as a person who is now against another person just for merely existing, right? And she was in the correct bathroom, not that that's even the point. Anyway, all that to say is that I feel like the community that's being targeted right now, or if we're talking about Black and brown folks, those communities are easier to target and visually see if you're a white hetero cis person, right? And so it's like anybody who's not is a target. Okay. Number 3 is discrimination, and that's where power groups use laws, customs, doctrines to deny the rights of those identified as, you know, other. So we're obviously seeing discrimination happen. And like I said, these things are happening all the time. If it's like right now, the big thing is trans folks, because that's what they're putting into like law, right? And so they're using this discrimination. There's a mass migration happening of folks who are no longer safe in their states. And so that's because these laws and customs and doctrine, like especially religious doctrine, are being put in a level where they can deny the rights of people. I don't know what else to expand on that. Like, we're seeing that constantly. Then number 4 is dehumanization. Diminished value of discriminated groups through propaganda, referring to folks as animals, insects, or diseases. So I have in the past couple months, and I started mentioning this, but then I saw an article where trans folks were identified as a disease. And I've seen, I haven't seen roach, I don't think. But I feel like coming out of COVID, the word disease is getting a lot of, like, mental clickbait. I don't know if that makes sense. But, like, it's like an alert, right? Like, disease. Like, people are hyper vigilant about the word disease because of living through this pandemic or experiencing this current, like, we're still continuing to be in this space of pandemic. So using the word disease is actually working to the benefit of the powers that be that are trying to discriminate and dehumanize these groups. So by referring to these folks as a disease, people are already up in arms about diseases. They're fearful of everything. But I did see an article about the word disease being used by, I'm sure it was a pastor somewhere, to talk about trans folks. And then number 5 is the organization. So that's the state's killing plans. So Florida specifically, just in the past month or so, has rewritten a bill to put folks in the death penalty. We're seeing this, like, with miscarriages or abortions. We're seeing penalties like that. We're seeing ICWA being overturned, the Indigenous, or the Indian Child Welfare Act. And, like, I think, did I mention how children are being targeted? Did I mention that in any of this? Oh, I did when I was talking about Africa. So here in the United States, children are being identified. The number one thing that is going to get complacency is the love of a parent. So if children can be targeted, the parents are going to fall in line. Hang on, did a cat get out of the catio? Let's look at these cats. Is someone out of the catio? Wisak, why are you barking? Hey, babe. Oh, you want a bicycle? Sure. So we're seeing things already going into place about death penalties and removing children from their families, because of gender affirming care, or how white people want to adopt Native children, which is why the Indian Child Welfare Act is even going to the Supreme Court again. Hang on. I don't usually talk this much. I haven't made a lot of videos either, so anyway. So we're seeing the states killing plans. We've been seeing it at the border. When I was doing my master's degree, one of the first papers I wrote my first semester was called Genocide in the Homeland. And with the border policies and border patrol and the constitutional amendments for the 100 feet, yards, 100 miles, I don't know what it is. There's like a buffer to, anyway, I wrote a whole, like, because of everything that was happening at the border, I recognized it as genocide, and I wrote a paper about it. But all that to say is that even if the state isn't explicitly doing concentration camps, and I'm talking about the state being like the powers that be, not just like an individual state. I'm talking about like the structure of the systemic state governments, like the state, is what that means. But like, even if the state isn't, you know, explicitly lining folks up or sending them to concentration camps, the way that people are having to survive, if you can't get housing, if you can't get a job, if you can't do these things, and folks are not able to survive that, that's still state-sanctioned violence. It's not explicitly being shot or in, you know, but it's still state-sanctioned violence. And so I really need folks to understand that. Like, this isn't just, it's not going to look the way it did because we have new technology. There's new ways to, and it might look the way it did. I mean, the way that Florida's going might look the way it did. But either way, the organization of the way that they can carry out these killings, Florida made a bill to reintroduce the death penalty for sex offenders, but the way that the bill was written was so broad, which most laws are. Most laws are just a bunch of words that really don't mean anything so that they can find their way out of it in court, right? Like, that's what laws are. I feel like there's a cat out of the catio. I don't know how they can get out. I fixed it. Ow. Hang on. I know he's barking at the neighbor. He's just talking shit. Anyway, so we're gonna be seeing more ways that the state can carry out death penalty, like we already are. It's already happening. For women, for trans folks, for children, for parents, it's happening. Not to mention the way that it's like indirectly happening, which we already did mention, but like I could totally expound on that. But I'm not going to, for your benefit. You're welcome. Polarization is number 6. And like I said, these things are like, he wrote this as it was like a checklist, right? Of like, this has to come first. But I need you to remember that these things are always happening. These things are always happening. In this country was founded on this. These are always happening in this country for one of these groups or another. Always, always, always. At one of these stages. It's not like, oh, we're here now, which is what the conversation is on TikTok. Like, folks are like, oh, we're here now. But like, this is always happening in different ways. Okay, every time someone gets shot by the police, this is being carried out. Okay? Every time people are put into prison or incarcerated for something they didn't do. This is all happening, right? These are state-sanctioned ways that this is being carried out. It doesn't look the way that it did in the 1940s. But this country is always carrying this out. Always. Ever since the beginning. Always. So polarization. The propaganda is amplified to show the difference between groups. We're seeing that everywhere. I mean, I hope you're seeing this. Like, if you're not seeing this, get on TikTok. Get on the right side of TikTok. And I don't mean like right politically side of TikTok. That's the wrong side. Get on the side where folks are talking about human rights. So the propaganda is drag queens are trying to indoctrinate your children into being gay. These books are going to turn your children gay. Gender is biological. Like, all of these things, right? And this is specifically for, like, what we're really seeing in Florida especially. It's happening in other states, but in Florida especially. Also, yeah, never mind. So the propaganda is amplified. It makes white supremacists, in this case, neo-fascists, folks who are Nazis, it makes them feel important. Like, it makes them feel better to see polarization. Propaganda is amplified. And I really want to do a whole show on propaganda, because it's not just, it's things you see. It's a lot of the time subconscious programming, which is going to refer back to this dehumanization piece. When these folks are being used, like these words are being used to describe people, it doesn't necessarily have to be as in like intense as disease, but we are seeing that, okay? But they can also just subconsciously program you by saying an adjective, disgusting, frightening, terrifying, right? And that's how this gets subconsciously programmed into folks to believe that, to like participate willingly, right? Because like you ask folks, and I mean, a lot of folks aren't going to be like, yeah, I would totally be participating in a genocide against others. No, it's quite the opposite, but a lot of it is subconscious programming that folks have picked up from propaganda. That's by design. So we're going to be doing a collective coffee on critical thinking, but I want to say that'll be the next one I do, is critical thinking. I didn't learn how to critically think until I was doing my master's, and it saved my life. So, okay. So polarization it's constantly being bombarded, right? We're constantly hearing about these different groups and how they don't deserve these things and how they're doing this to our children or whatever. And that's separating you, good, Bible thumping human, from these deviants, from these diseases, from these people that need to be eradicated. And that's how folks, more than likely subconsciously, if they even have any space to digest this, right? Even if folks are even getting this information, because folks are busy working and whatnot, there's not space for compassion or questioning or anything because of the way that this system works. Capitalism by design is meant to keep you completely distracted and like in your own world, doing your own thing, right? Manifest destiny, the American dream, to keep you out of this unless you're gonna like willingly participate, right? And usually if people knew, or if people just have, I mean, there's lots of horrible people, but anyway, I'm hoping that you're good people. Number 7 is preparation. Victims are identified, so they're not victims to the state, right? This is Gregory Stanton writing this, so he's identifying them as victims. The state doesn't recognize these folks as victims. So folks are identified, separated, and forced to wear symbols. Deportations, isolation, and starvation are used as tactics. So like that's something that I spoke on earlier, was like about, it might not be a firing squad, but people are still having to get through these different levels of like hurdles to be able to survive, right? State sanctioned violence. So I mean, specifically in Los Angeles, like I'm going to bring up homelessness right now, because this is like a countrywide thing, global thing. But like homeless folks are separated completely, quarantined. They're they're constantly doing like homeless sweeps. There's actually a big homeless sweep that happened a few days ago down in Phoenix. I was watching it on TikTok. But like that's a really easy thing to say, like share, is like homeless folks. So the preparation is that these homeless folks are here. They don't belong here. We can't have them here. It's an eyesore, whatever. Oh, we don't have any funding for housing. Just go get a job, right? Like that's the rhetoric. But like, so homeless folks are isolated. You know, they're barely surviving as it is. Drugs, not to mention the drug aspect either. But like that's a really easy example to see. I don't think we've seen this. Right now we're seeing people in the last minute get out of where they're at, trying to avoid this. But like, for instance, Native folks, with the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, being challenged in the Supreme Court or even brought back, or like removed, so that... I got you. Yeah, I got you. Wow, that's a big sound. Thank you. I'll be done in a minute. Okay, thank you. What was I talking about? Oh, like Native folks. We saw this with the residential schools. That was a genocide. So people were identified, separated. They were taken from their parents. Florida's getting ready to do this with trans youth, or any youth, apparently. And then that's not a good spot. Persecution is number 8. I know, this is a long video. This is important. This is like really important. Victims are identified and isolated. Death lists are drawn up. I feel like we're going to be seeing this soon. We're already seeing folks identified and isolated because that happened here, right, in preparation. And it's happening right now. People are being rewarded for calling people in, right? People are being rewarded for snitching, you know? People are being rewarded for all of these different ways that they're helping uphold what the state wants to do. And like the Karen phenomenon is like a really huge part of like genocide being able to be carried out. So like what I mean by that is like if you've seen the Karens, right? Like racist white women who get in the fucking tizzy because a black or brown person's in their space or next to them or by them or scared them or whatever, and they call in the state, call the police, knowing how the police react to black and brown people. But like that's how this is carried out. It's carried out at like, yes, a much larger level, but like the fascinating phenomenon is that individuals support it and carry out genocide. So people are being identified as not okay according to these new laws. And people are continuing to be like, yeah, totally, no, yeah, no, them, you know? And like, that's not good. That's not good. Next is number 9. Massacres occur or begin. I think that if we take in all state-sanctioned violence, massacres have been happening constantly. But in regards to like what we're gonna see more of coming, because we're in this. This is happening. I don't think it's gonna look like what massacres have looked like in the past. But we are already seeing this with, you know, these white supremacists and like the public shootings. I have my own theories about that and how we can talk about that at a collective that feels like a good conversation for collective coffee. But massacres might look different than what we're familiar with, and I feel like they already are happening, because these folks that are carrying out these shootings are getting this hate information from somewhere, right? They're agents of the state. And in my opinion, and I'm just gonna say this and then we'll talk about it further. You guys ever seen Suicide Squad? I haven't, but I do know that the premise of having a group of people incarcerated that you can unleash into the public, very rarely do I hear what happens to a person who has committed one of these shootings that survives. So I'm just gonna leave that out there. You don't have to agree with me. That's okay. It's a conspiracy theory. And then number 10, denial. The city or the state is perpetrators deny involvement and blame victims. And we already see that. Constant scapegoating is like, should be the United States' middle name. So this is what's happening within like the bounds of this country. This doesn't talk about the violence that America has done overseas at any given point of time. We're talking specifically mostly about where we're at right now and what we're in. What I'm seeing a lot on TikTok is people being like, we're at stage 8, we're at stage 8. And I don't disagree, but like I said, these things are always moving. So this group is always moving in between these two rungs, right? You have folks fluctuating in and out of these spaces, and these are always going to be going against each other. And then you have all of these happening, but at different places and stages for each of these groups. So it's not linear, and it's not a list or a 2D picture like this. These stages are being used on every one of these groups of people simultaneously, all the time. But like right now they're really choosing which ones to really focus on. And while they're doing that and getting folks hyped up, they're making even more laws to target even more of these folks, right? They're targeting the schools, they're targeting doctors. Doctors cannot get felonies for providing abortions or anything like that. We're seeing pharmacists, people are in their professions that they've chosen to help people, are getting their hands tied and unable to help people and now being penalized by providing that professional support. And that's where we get the oppression Olympics, because people have to still survive. People still have families. People still have bills and things. So they have to unwillingly participate. And that's most of what it is. So I hope this was helpful. Like I said in Collective Coffee, I don't think that things are going to get better right now. I don't have the answers, but I'm just trying to help support information so that folks can maybe recognize it within themselves, if and when they're supporting state-sanctioned violence. And if you're called from a heart or consciousness place to try to look for something that's a little bit less oppressive to make your money or whatever, I applaud you. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take the money being affected at a higher level in order to gain more individual power back down here. So thanks for being here on Freedom Friday. I will see you soon.